honor and pleasure to be here again. Probably the most beautiful venue in all of Davos. I mean, if you look here. So thank you for securing this place. It is special and magical.
2021 is secure too.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. I'll be back. Robert Rodriguez, Chairman, Founder of Signet. My previous life, I was Secret Service agent for 22 years. Rebooted, became an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist, equity partner at Signway Ventures. I'm going to pass the mic over and let our guests introduce themselves, and then I'll open the Q&A.
Got a mic. Hi, I'm Andrea Block. My second time in this beautiful venue. My background is that of a lawyer turned general counsel turned chief risk, ethics, compliance, corporate responsibility officer, and then information security oversight as well. 7 years ago, I started my own business doing everything that I used to do on the inside, from the outside looking in, and that means advising boards and senior executives on their big strategic risks that have to do with ESG issues as well as technology and cyber issues. And next week I start a new course that I'm teaching at NYU to continue the education theme. At their master's in the Center for Global Affairs with a specialty in cybersecurity. And my course is about exactly what this panel is talking about, which is cyber leadership, risk oversight, and resilience.
Hi, I'm Paul Raines. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the United Nations Development Program. My previous life, I was the CISO for Bloomberg, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and I was in the Air Force where I was nuclear missile launch officer. All the people talking about the mutual assured destruction, I thought I was going back in time. And then I was also I was a PSYOP planner, and then I also was single integrated operation plan as the nuclear war plan that we use in the United States. And then I controlled satellites.
Hi, I'm David Stender. I'm the Chief Security Officer for M&T Bank. I have anything related to security, physical, cybersecurity, fraud, disaster recovery, resiliency. Prior to that, I was the Chief Security Officer for the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. Chief Security Officer for a guy named Ross Perot, if you know Ross Perot, another great Texan. A lot of Texans here at this conference today. And prior to that, 26 years in the U.S. Navy, I was a cryptologic officer, swapping between deployment and time at NSA.
Hi, my name's Joe Sullivan. I'm the Chief Security Officer at Cloudflare. I got into security in the 90s. I was a federal prosecutor in the United States, started doing cybercrime, and I went to eBay in 2002. 2008, I switched over from eBay and PayPal to Facebook. I was the Facebook Chief Security Officer for about 6 years, from smaller than MySpace to over 1 billion users. Was the CSO at Uber for 2.5 years. 2016 was on President Obama's Cyber Commission, and I joined my current company in 2018.
Andrea and gentlemen, honored to be here. This is a very esteemed group with a lot of knowledge. So we're going to cover leadership, culture, risk, integrity of the data and protecting that, and services, incident response, crisis management, and resilience. I don't know what we're going to get in here, but we're going to start with the communication with the board. As a CISO to the board, and then the board to the CISO, how do you go about building trust with that board, especially when you're describing and articulating very complex matters? For example, how do you articulate in protecting the enterprise holistically versus compartmentalized risk, and how are you managing that? How are you increasing your budgets, and how do you explain risk to a board if they're thinking about going to a cloud? I mean, there's many, many topics. I'll start with you, Joe.
Sure. I think the dynamic between security organizations and the CEO and board has fundamentally changed in the last couple of years. Expectations have gotten exponentially higher. And I actually think as a profession, we haven't done a good job of rising to the occasion. We saw in the earlier conversation today on risk quantification, we don't have an agreed approach, and we don't speak the same language of business as some of the other executives at the company. So when we do show up to the CEO and the board, they don't understand our language, and they don't trust our risk judgment well enough. And so we're kind of at a bad place. The good news, and one thing that I think has really changed, is that 5 years ago, we were trying to figure out how to get in front of the board and the CEO to talk about resources. Now they're pulling us. I do some mentoring of CISOs, and I've also started getting a lot of calls from CEOs. And they say the same thing to me over and over. They said, oh, I noticed you report to the CEO, and you did that at your last job too. Where do I find a security leader who can report to the CEO? And then I start talking to a bunch of security leaders, and they say, I don't want to report to the CEO. That's a danger zone. But I think we have to elevate the profession to be able to report to the CEO. And that doesn't mean you have to report to the CEO. It means you have to be able to speak the language of business and be able to explain the risk in the context of where the business is trying to go.
David, we'll move on down this way. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd say actually one of the biggest issues of that, and where we see such a great problem with security leadership, is that they can't speak at all levels. You have to be able to talk to frontline folks, and you have to be able to talk to the CEO and the board. One of the things that I've done, my bank, for example, has one of the oldest tenured boards in financial services in the United States. One of the things I've done is to sell myself as a banker. Right? I don't talk about myself as a banker, or excuse me, as a security guy. I talk about myself as a banker and how security enables banking. Once I start to talk like that, they have a much better idea of where I'm coming from. Now, I will grant you that it's a new and confusing area for a lot of them because they just don't have the background. We have zillions of years of data around credit laws or something like that, and it's easy to understand that because you have that background. So it's a little bit new, but we put a lot of effort into education and expose them. I've even gone so far as to recruit a former deputy director of NSA to be on our board, primarily because I wanted someone there who could, rather than them just believing what I said or having to believe what I said, there was someone who could effectively challenge me and give a second opinion, so that when they nodded their heads, it was because they actually believed it, not just because I said it. And that's made it much more effective, I think, in terms of the overall sort of value of that board security relationship.
Absolutely. Paul?
Well, I've been CISO now for 23 years. And if I had to say, in all my discussions with the board, the one single question that gets asked more than any other is, how do you sleep at night? And if you sit back and you think about what is it that they're really concerned, what is being conveyed in that question? What's being conveyed is that, one, they know that cybersecurity is something that's very complex, and it's growing in complexity and in terms of the seriousness. And the second thing they want to know is, in order to sleep at night, what am I doing in order to ensure the reputation and the finances and the productivity of the institution? So the way I've handled that has been, you want to be able to convey that you're doing due diligence, the best that you possibly can. So the first thing I do is I get ISO 27000 certified. And I want to show that, we're following best practices in cybersecurity. We're certified by an external auditor once a year that proves that. Another thing that I do is I make sure that the good work that we're doing gets recognized within the industry. And a lot of times people will get awards and it's all about, I want to show off, that I won this award or that award. But, 5 times my cybersecurity unit has gotten a CSO 50 award. I think that's more than any other organization in the history of that award. We just recently won an award on digital innovation. Not just cybersecurity, but digital innovation. It's called a Future Edge 50 award. So the reason why I think this is important, it's not about personal glory, it's about conveying to your board that not only are you certified as best practices, but you're one of the best in the industry in that area. And I think by getting these certifications, taking that extra effort to try to win those awards, that's a way of telegraphing to the board in advance of any discussion that you have with them that you know what you're doing.
So Andrea, before we you addressed this. I just wanted to make an observation based on the gentleman's comments. If you think about the CISO or CSO from 10, 12 years ago, they're viewed as cost centers, as kind of a blue-collar security person that was more technical. Today, you're viewed as risk executives who are briefing your board on a quarterly basis, if not more, and have evolved to a point where, to your point, David, sitting on publicly traded boards and bringing ROI to the component as a business executive over a CISO. How do we maintain the trajectory of that going forward?
So everything that I just heard resonates a lot with me in terms of how the game has been upped in the last few years, and that the CISO really has to be an executive who could talk to the CEO, report to the CEO perhaps, also talk to the board. I would like to sort of flip it around a little bit. I think the other side of the equation also has to learn and also has to collaborate with the CISO. So, for example, if your chief risk officer and your general counsel and your chief auditor aren't talking and huddling with you at all times about the important cyber issues, there's something missing in that picture. So I think that's one line of progress, potential progress, if you don't have it in any company. I think the other thing is, I went through a difficult learning experience, not coming from a technical background, being a general counsel, where I had to sort of understand InfoSec from that perspective, and it was very painful. It took 6 months for me to learn everything I needed to know to come up with some suggestions. And I think we need to have those cross-disciplinary teams within the organizations coming up with that, with a governance superstructure that then the CEO and the C-suite adopt. So if you have that going on, you can maintain what you just asked. But then beyond that, and there is progress made on the boards where sometimes you do have a cyber or a risk expert actually sitting on the board. That's the rarity, unfortunately. I think it happens in the big companies, in the companies with high risk like banks and defense contractors, whatever. But the regular companies, you have the same old CEOs and CFOs sitting on those boards that have been sitting there forever, undiverse in background and expertise, and those people are not going to understand cyber. So until that sort of logjam gets broken and they bring in some new blood, people like people on this stage, and many of you, I'm sure, we're not going to have the right kind of dialogue between boards and executives.
So it's a great segue, because my next question is on culture. Okay, so this is a cultural change. So to Paul and David, how do you educate your people on to not click? Your secure DevOps teams under pressure to get product out immediately. What's that balance, and how have you achieved? What kind of models and approaches and training have you used to get where you need to get to? David.
So I'm a big believer in fear. We have tried to put in place a program that is fairly comprehensive, but it hasn't started so much with the users writ large within the company. It's much more about my own team and getting them to sort of come out from behind the green door and start to actually talk to folks, right? And to be seen as, okay, here's your business problem. This is what you would like to do. Here's a way I can help you do that in a secure way that could become a differentiator for you. That's on the sort of business, the revenue center versus cost center side. On the peer sort of training side of our users, we have really taken an approach that has been fairly aggressive, where we have had a little bit of that public discipline that folks have talked about here earlier, the retribution that Chad talked about, for example, to make sure that, yeah, everyone's going to click eventually, but we're going after the serial folks, right? And we actually, I've worked with a couple of the more senior executive secretaries who are probably the most targeted folks within the company because they represent the CEO and the CFO, etc. And I've gotten them to come out and publicly admit where they've made a mistake. And that actually has worked fantastically for me in spreading the message, way more than me doing my annual, couple-hour anti-phishing training that we do for all the users at the bank.
Paul?
Well, over the years, I think my philosophy has evolved on training users. At the beginning of my CISO journey, it was, oh, let's make everyone take this mandatory training and sign off that they took the mandatory training, and then hold them accountable, and fire people if you hold phishing exercises and they click on the wrong attachment three times in a row, then fire them. But now I think it's not so much about, I think there should be an initial training to make sure everyone's on the same part, but then from then on, it's about awareness messages to them, like letting them know what the threats are that are out there, especially if it's a tactical threat. This specific type of email it looks like this, and have a screenshot, let them know that. Or if you want more broad awareness, how to handle phishing emails in general, to send them an email they click on a link and it gives them a 3-minute video about how to handle phishing. And so I think that's more effective for users. And a lot of these phishing emails that people talk about, if you try to train your employees in the negative way, to slap their hand if they do it wrongly. I think the way the phishing threat has evolved, it's more on the CISO now. If you haven't deployed defenses against attachments and bad links and had multi-factor authentication, I think it reflects more poorly on the CISO if you've got a phishing problem in your organization, rather than blame it on the poor employee that you fire after 3 bad clicks, and the person has all this great background, and the company spent all this money to recruit them in. So that's how I've evolved over the time in terms of, over the years in terms of training and awareness.
One other thought on this, to kind of bring together a couple of different points. People in sub-organizations at a company respond to what their executive cares about. And so if you as a security leader are spending the right amount of time with the executives overseeing the other functions, that executive is going to come to appreciate why you're there and what your team's mission is. And then you can ask them to deliver the message to their team. I found I can stand up in front of the company and yell till I'm blue in the face about security, but if that team's executive stands up in front of them and they're all hands and tells them it's important, they listen. And so getting the other team's executives, it has 2 benefits. 1, you're getting your security message out in a more effective way. 2, you're getting more exposure to the business by building those relationships.
So I've heard that from numerous CISOs across the country, sticks and carrots, holding the line managers accountable is seen, and then having board of director and CEO top cover to do that. So Andrew, you've been in this business as a practitioner, now as an advisor, and you've seen how the adversary, we used to look at it, keeping them out. It's not like that anymore. They're in. So what that did is it drove your incident response, your resilience programs. What is that going to look like in the future, and what transition have you seen in your, I think, 7 years now as an advisor to companies?
So I think, to sort of cap off everything that's just been said, I think it all starts and ends with the CEO. So if the CEO isn't taking all this stuff seriously, providing the support, the talk, the walk the talk, the tone from the top to the CISO and the organization, giving resources, giving visibility, doing what you just discussed, sort of the distribution of messages going not just to a few executives, but to the entire organization, tying it maybe to incentive programs, compensation. If the CEO isn't doing that, and of course if the board isn't holding the CEO accountable, which is another whole area of disconnect, then you can't create that culture of cyber hygiene and being safe to speak up. It reminds me very much of 20 years ago when I first started as a corporate executive and I was involved with building ethics and compliance programs. The ethics culture comes from the CEO more than anything else. And if people see that that person doesn't really commit, they say that they're zero tolerance or have all kinds of commitment to ethics, but then they cheat on their expense report. That becomes part of the culture. So the same thing I think applies to the security and the cyber and the hygiene within organizations. And I think that the more that the security organization can be part of the executive team and have the resources, the training, and the safety to speak up, I think that's a really important thing. Safety to make mistakes, not fire people immediately because they clicked 3 times. I think those things are important, and that becomes part of the water of the organization. It gets into the water of the organization, and people then know that the culture is about keeping the place safe. So it's building resilience over time through these programs.
Completely agree. So I'm going to ask the 3 CISOs, but I still want, Andrea, I want your input on this next question. So it doesn't matter what investors invest in or what entrepreneurs build to. It matters what the buyers prioritize, and moving from that nice to have to need to have. And so CISOs in many ways are drivers of innovation, they're drivers of markets. When you're planning for next year's budget, let's start with you, Joe. What are your priorities? What are you looking at?
I think the number one thing is identity and access management. You always think about, like, from the standpoint of an enterprise being under attack, they can get in through your people or they can get in through your code. And we're probably doing a better job at securing our code than securing our people. And there's a lot of innovation happening right now around identity and access management. And a lot of us are dealing with this hybrid world where some of our stuff is behind a network on-prem, some of it's in the cloud and these SaaS apps, infrastructure as a service, et cetera. And trying to get your identity framework to work in all those contexts is really hard. And that's where I think a lot of investment's going right now in a lot of security teams.
I'm hearing that a lot over the last year. My disappointment, because we're very involved with innovation, entrepreneurship, Signet supports small business in cybersecurity. Identity management, access management has not they've been incremental in their advancement of innovation. High friction, just latency, why do you think that is? I mean, you had Okta make some headway, but...
It's one of the most complex areas you can deal with within cybersecurity. I mean, there's so many aspects to it. When you look at proofing, authentication, authorization, and entitlement, every one of those is a landmine area. And then trying to do that in a coordinated fashion so that when you're allowing someone to use as an example, their Facebook login to get in and look at their bank account, that can be an issue, right? There's so many different areas of this that can go wrong that it's one of the last areas that's attacked. You try to take the sort of lowest common bar approach rather than really start to step out and try new ways of doing things. And most of the IDAM companies that have popped up, the more innovative ones, they tend to die off fairly quickly because they have a niche capability which may look good. Facial recognition, biometrics, blood samples, whatever. But the problem is they last very shortly. Someone breaks it and then all of a sudden they're pushed off to the side, right? And so it never gains the traction, I think, that you really need to push this forward like some of the other areas have.
And I think enrollment is the most complex and the hardest probably to do. So when we were in the government, Secret Service, we had enrollment, background checks, polygraphs, all that stuff. But that's not realistic in the real world, right? So investments, David, what are you looking for next year?
So actually, most of my focus is around people. Again, I work for Ross Perot. I'm a big believer in hire for character, train for skills, right? So if I get the right folks, any toys that we buy, any new processes we put in place, they can make those work. And they're really going to be the driver of it. I use my folks as the driver for the new technologies that I want to look at. And really that focus on people, now that hasn't been my full focus, but that's probably where most of my effort next year will be going, is in continuing to enhance and then also attract the right people, for my group.
Paul.
Well, I have to, I thought I could escape work and all the budgeting for this coming year, by coming here, and then you asked me the same question, there are back there. So some of the things we're spending it on is we internally developed a platform for incident response and threat hunting. So we're going to expand on those capabilities. Another is in cyber awareness training to make it more user-friendly for end users. And we were also incidentally working on identity management. One aspect I want to bring up, about why sometimes it's so difficult, is the human aspect. Because I know the people that work on our ERP system have a different authentication system than we use for network authentication. And we want to go to a single, method. And they don't want to change because it's work for them. And so we're looking at Okta, for example. But then Okta, the underlying authentication scheme under one system is LDAP. And we want to get away from that and go to like ADFS for everyone. So Okta we look at as a Band-Aid. It still has the same persistent problem. So we're under Chatham House rules, aren't we? I hope. Because I'm Chatham
There's
away
a
here.
live stream going on right there.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that a lot of times in cybersecurity, when you're trying to affect a solution, you have to take into account the personalities of the different players that you have to work with. There's an old saying, where a person stands depends upon where they sit. And I find that very much, in my organization. So you become almost an ambassador to these different groups to try to get them to agree to a solution.
So as an advisor and observer, what do you see in boards' priorities in terms of what they talk about with their investments?
Well, I think, let me kind of go to a topic that's related but a little different, and I'm going to invoke the name of my partner in crime, Maya Bund, who had the first panel this morning. One of the things that we are working on, we're working on a paper where we're looking at the idea of what do outside stakeholders want. So the board is not an outside stakeholder, but they're going to be very sort of concerned about what investors are thinking, what other stakeholders, customers, employees as well. But especially when you look at the investor community, what do they want out of a company? And I think, we think that there may be pressure coming from governments and regulators at some point for companies to report their cyber profile, their cyber resilience. And we're talking about different aspects of it here. What do you do to create the cyber resilience in your company? And then how do you express it both internally and externally? And we think that it's just a matter of time, not if, but when, that regulators are going to start asking for some kinds of metrics, just like there are in the EU right now for ESG issues. They may be coming out with some. So we're sort of trying to brainstorm that. We're going to have a paper that comes out in the next few weeks, I guess. But I think that's something that's going to be top of mind of boards and CEOs, especially publicly traded companies, let's be real, because that'll affect the value that the outside world is going to see. So I think a lot of the things that we heard here today about the kinds of programs and the kinds of training, audits, the audits that you mentioned earlier, I think those things are going to be super important as part of that resilience building. And creating that culture of it's okay to make a mistake, but you have to learn from it and have continuous improvement programs, not just a slapdash kind of, oh, here we had a problem, let's hit it here, and then it's whack-a-mole and something comes up somewhere else. So I think the whole issue is going to become much more important.
I think you're ahead of the curve, so kudos to you. So let's talk about, they're all in the cloud, like Capital One, Sallie Mae Bank, Clear. Capital One had their issue. So companies are either in the cloud, going there, partially in there, or thinking about it. What has your journey been like, Joe? I mean, you're cloud native, right? So
It's in our name, so. I mean, to steal and change a phrase, like every company is either in the cloud or is in the cloud and doesn't realize it's in the cloud. You don't have a choice, and it's where business is going. It's much more efficient for companies. And the funny thing is, I think security teams have been the last holdouts to the cloud at a lot of companies. We like our on-prem hardware. And so when I started building the security team at Cloudflare, 18 months ago, we kind of looked at what we were going to do, and we said we need to be in the cloud completely because we need to be empathetic with our customers. We need to experience the same pain that they do. And it'll also allow us to dog food our own products and help the company with innovation around supporting our customers. And so we've embraced fully being in the cloud as a security organization. And you see that there's a lot of different steps where you feel like you're giving up control because you worry about having security people live on their logs and log analysis, and you have to think about logging and analysis very differently in the cloud and make sure that the vendors will give you what you need. So I think that's kind of the way I've approached it, is we have to experience what our customers feel. Everyone's going to be in the cloud sooner or later, and so we might as well just get there.
So what's the approach to those customers that are in that category of thinking about it? So you have a different sales approach, marketing approach, or is it all the same?
Part of it is discovery. I think what happened is that like marketing teams and sales teams moved into the cloud and for a few years we talked about that concept of shadow IT, and then they came out in the open. It's not a surprise anymore. And security leaders got disintermediated. They basically got left behind. And what I always try and tell them is, this is how you can get back to being relevant in your company, is actually getting involved in helping the other business leaders with their applications, making them more secure. It's surprising how many tech products are managed not by the IT organization at most companies right now.
And before we go to David, if anybody wants to interject, please feel free. This is open dialogue. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, so, incidentally, the co-founder of Uber, Garrett Camp, was my first master's student many years ago in Canada. I wrote an article later on, much later, like 15 years after, called Blockchain and the Real Sharing Economy, Uberization Demystified. So I think where you're coming from my perspective, is a bit old thinking. So I wonder, what do you think about the role of blockchain, if you think that cloud is innovation? Sorry to be,
No,
maybe
please.
I sound very
please.
aggressive here. But
No, that's great.
Thank you.
I think in the security context, blockchain so far for a lot of companies has been a solution in search of a problem. And so, as a practitioner, what I'm looking for, and what I spend my money on, is something that will solve a problem for me. We do all have things that keep us awake at night. And so we wake up in the morning and think about those things, and I'm going to spend money on something that solves one of my top 3 problems. Or I'm going to point my team towards something that solves one of those top 3 problems. And so I don't care if it's blockchain or cloud or an endpoint solution that I have to install. I'm going to use it if it gets the job done.
That goes to that nice to have category versus need to have. David, I think we'll go to you, Peter.
Yes, I would say I'm not a fan of being driven to the cloud because it does take away some level of choice and sort of fine-grained capability. But it's not, as a lot of people have said in the industry previously, cloud is just someone else's computer, right? It's not mysterious like people have made it out to be, just like cybersecurity is not as mysterious as people have made it out to be. If it's in the cloud, it can still be secured. And so you just have to have a better educated cybersecurity workforce that understands how they can best support the business from that aspect. That's tough to do because most folks like to be able to touch it themselves, but that's not always the way that you're going to move the business forward.
And to include the workforce, but also obviously your board of directors and CEOs, having them buy in, understanding.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at my bank specifically, 6 years ago, we weren't in the cloud because we were not a digital bank. We were a pure brick and mortar wealth and retail organization. But because of the changing sort of international global culture towards a digital economy, we have been forced into that and we've taken it up. And so I've spent a lot of time educating our board about what cloud means, what security in the cloud means, why that can be a good thing for us. It shouldn't be something necessarily to be feared.
Again, building trust and a comfort level. Peter.
I just have a question, maybe a little bit more forward-looking. The previous panel touched very briefly on AI and facial recognition. Just thinking about rapid advances in a number of these areas, Internet of Things, perhaps even robotics in a manufacturing and even the healthcare sector. Do you worry or think that the spending today is looking at yesterday and today's problems, and I even put cloud in probably a today problem, not a future problem? And to what extent do you think that more spending and focus is needed on things that will be here tomorrow? Again, AI is here already in many industries. Do you think there's a cyber concern or reprioritisation needed?
I was just saying, if you want to turn off a lot of security leaders with your product, you describe it as driven by AI. And the funny, there are a lot of security products that come across as a black box. And what I don't like as a security leader is a black box. My teams want to understand how it works, why it works, and how it will be effective, and how can I measure its effectiveness. And when something's working in a black box, you can't do that. And so I see that as a failure in a bunch of products. But I think you're asking a different question about how do we
business applications and rapid advances.
Right. And the question is are the business applications going to be moving into those areas? And I haven't seen it yet to the point. I think security is, I've heard, 5 years behind the rest of the company in the adoption of technology. Hopefully we can shorten that time frame. But we've tried a lot to use AI in security. I've managed fraud teams and have found machine learning to be very effective because you have a lot of data on known bads and you can train against it much more effectively than I think in the cyber context so far. But I think we're all thinking about it, we're just not seeing the products that we're ready to deploy.
Harold, you had a question.
So to the board governance, about 3 years ago, I ran across a beautiful study in Harvard Business Review, and they polled boards, 14 to 18 variables, cyber, civil unrest, financial market crashes, and all that kind of thing. Cybersecurity, cyber risk, 1, 2, or 3. And then when they went to where are you spending your resources, where it's down at the very bottom, it's 14, 15, 16, okay? How do we close that gap? What's the answer? Or are you seeing the gap closed?
Let's go to Andrea.
Board governance.
Put some cyber savvy people on the board. I mean, you have to have that diversity of firepower at the board level to hold the CEO accountable. The CEOs sometimes don't understand until the crisis hits them. And so if you don't have a board that's proactively managing, overseeing the CEO and how the CEO goes at this, and I think it also goes back to having a very robust enterprise risk management program in place, which the security folks and the cyber folks have to be plugged into in a big way, so that then rises up to both management and the board. And there have to be people on the board and management that can ask the right risk questions and in terms of budgets and solutions and problem solving and so on. So, I think it's people at the end of the day that are missing, not technology or not, solutions.
Right, I mean, people tend to put at high risk those things which they don't understand, and it draws a little bit of fear into it. So if you have a board that doesn't understand what cybersecurity is, they're going to fear it a little more, and it's going to rate higher. But they also then don't have the confidence to put money into dealing with it because they don't understand what they're really spending on. I would actually, and I've argued for my board, that the cybersecurity risk is actually lower on the food chain, and the amount of spend we have is actually adequate, or maybe even a little bit more than we need to be spending. Right? Because you don't want to spend $20 to stop $10 in security problems. There's a tipping point somewhere, but you don't want to get out of control. I could go in front of, I bet any cybersecurity, any CISO, any CSO could go in front of a board and say, I've got a cybersecurity problem, I need money, and they would just pour it out to them if they wanted it. But most of us try to do cost-effective security, which is harder to do, but it's a better way to approach it, so you're not just throwing money at a problem that isn't as big a problem maybe as other people think.
Okay, 30 seconds, please.
What is the role that the Paris cyber support plays? Because Brad Smith, his Microsoft digital diplomacy team have helped get more signatories, and many of us are cornered. And so last year there were maybe 400 signatories, and now there are 9,000.
That's which accord you're talking
The
about?
Macron Paris Accord. And I was just curious, is it playing a role in disseminating awareness, advancing standards? I to the last panel.
Paul?
Yeah, I can answer it only from the UN's perspective, because this recently came on my radar screen. So we have a meeting of CISOs that will happen in March, and I'm going to bring this up as an agenda topic. Because I've read over the accords, there's nothing in them that I would disagree with. And I just think that the UN was one of the organizations that helped bring that together, and I think the UN as a whole should be endorsing the Paris Accords.
I would just add, I was one of the first signatories to that in 1998 or 2018. Fourfold increase since the beginning of the year last year when we were here to today. We're going to announce tomorrow night a fourfold increase. The end of our Europa Hotel, big press conference there.
Andrea, Joe, David, Paul, thank you for sharing your knowledge. It's fantastic.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. This is, I mean, this is a panel that you don't want to stop, but unfortunately, we don't have this time, right? If this was a great panel, the next panel is going to be another phenomenal panel. This is a very eclectic.